It's 1834, and you just arrived back to your home from a secret midnight lesson. This lesson was taught by a man named Frederick Douglass. Stories say he was taught the alphabet by your owner. This man was teaching you and all of your fellow slaves how to read and write, so that you could record your experiences as a slave. You wake up the next morning and hear that the man Frederick Douglass has been taken to a nearby plantation due to teaching other slaves to read and write. This scared you and even confused you. Why didn't they just beat him or hang him? Later that day, you realize he's been sent to work on Edward Covey's plantation. Mr. Covey constantly beat slaves and forced them to work very long hours. This was much worse than any beating. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Better History. My name is Logan, and today we're going to be talking about Frederick Douglass. If you have any other video ideas for me, let me know down in the comments. I would love to do them for you. Alright, so Frederick Douglass was a slave that became one of the most well-known abolitionists of all time. I want to thank Mr. Robinson, my history teacher, for the resources. Alright, so Frederick Douglass was born in February of 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. And no one, including Douglass himself, really knew his exact date of birth, which was common for enslaved people to not know when they were born. It's kind of sad, actually. Surprisingly enough, he actually died on February 20th of 1895. So he was born and died in February. Anyway, he was born as a slave, and as a child, he received a bit of instruction on how to read and write, but he mostly taught himself. And he would teach other slaves how to read and write before he got caught and sent to another plantation, like I stated earlier. Frederick was originally born as Frederick Bailey, as he takes the last name of Douglass after he escaped slavery and tries to keep from getting caught. Alright, so when Frederick Douglass was sent to this new plantation at around the age of 16, he was beaten a lot, and this caused him to attempt to escape. He failed a lot. Many times. And in 1838, by the time he was about 20, he was able to get aboard a northbound train that went through Delaware. Now, free blacks and even enslaved blacks back then had to carry documents to state that they were either free or who they belonged to. Frederick Douglass wasn't about to show the train conductor his papers that stated he was a slave, so he took a huge risk and borrowed his friend's documents and used that. Now, Douglass and his friend looked different, way different. But it still worked, and that's actually pretty interesting to me. I think the train conductor let him off. So yeah, he was able to get to New York City, and once he got there, he sent back for Anna Marie. Frederick and Anna Marie kind of had a thing going, and they got married. This is when they take the last name Douglass to hide their identity, to keep from getting captured and taken back to slavery. They live in Bedford, Massachusetts, while Frederick starts to attend some abolitionist meetings. Also, in Massachusetts, he gave his first recorded speech called "I Have Come to Tell You Something About Slavery." In Lynn, Massachusetts, in October of 1841, while he was attending a abolitionist meeting, he was introduced to a very famous guy, William Lloyd Garrison. If you don't know who William Lloyd Garrison is, he was the author of the newspaper, The Liberator. It was an abolitionist newspaper. It was very popular. Now, Garrison and Douglass talked a bit, and after this talking, Garrison was able to convince Douglass to speak to the people about his life as a slave and how terrible slavery was. After that, 2 years later, in 1843, Douglass became part of an American Anti-Slavery Society 6-month tour of the U.S. to spread the message of anti-slavery. Being a part of the abolitionist movement isn't a safe thing. That is 100% not a safe thing. Look at Nat Turner, did an episode on him last week. Check that out. It's a great episode. He was hung, and he actually made it harder for slaves because they're not allowed to read and write after that. And John Brown, he was captured and hung. I mean, Harriet Tubman got out alive, luckily. She ended up dying of a disease, which is pretty sad. But it's not the safe thing to do, because if you get caught, you will most likely die. I mean, it's not that good. So people would, at these meetings, these abolitionist meetings, people would beat some of the free black men and even the white men that were a part of the abolitionist movement, and even tried to kill some of them, which is pretty sad, but that's how it was. In 1845, moving on, Frederick Douglass published a book called The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. He wrote a book about himself. He's a great man. This book showed how terrible and evil slavery truly was. One famous quote that Frederick Douglass said was, quote, "I appear before you this evening as a thief and a robber. I stole this head, these limbs, this body, from thy master, and ran off with them," unquote. I love that quote because it speaks to the heart, right? He is saying that he stole himself because he is property. He is defined as property back then. Now, we came to our senses and we're all human, right? But back then they were property, so he stole himself from his master and ran to be free. It's a great quote in my opinion. For me, it's hard to explain, but yeah. It states how absurd it was for someone to say that one human could own another. In 1847, Frederick Douglass published his own newspaper called the North Star, and the next year he attended the Seneca Falls Convention. This convention pushed for the equal rights of women. He was a big guy. When he died, and we'll talk about it in a second, when he died, he was actually attending a women's rights convention the same day. Yeah, he was pushed for women's rights, which is good. It's a good thing. Moving on to 1861, when the war breaks out, Frederick Douglass becomes an advisor to Abraham Lincoln, and actually he helps him in recruiting African American troops to fight in the Civil War. Now, after the war, black men and women were still terribly discriminated against, which led Douglass to continue fighting for equal rights and liberty for the people. In 1878, he moved to his estate, Cedar Hill, which overlooked Washington, D.C., and actually he would walk into D.C. to meet with congressmen and fight with, or sometimes against them, for equal rights. One interesting thing is that in 1888, he was the first black man to receive a vote for presidency at the Republicans' National Convention. But he didn't make it out of the first round. But still, that's a great accomplishment, right? On February 20th of 1895, Frederick Douglass died of a heart attack. As I said, he was attending a women's convention for equal rights that same day. So that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching. Next week, we will be taking a dive into his speech to What to a Slave is the 4th of July, and look into the letter that he sent Harriet Tubman. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And day or night, have a good one. See you next time.